Welcome back to Illinois Lawmakers. We are in the Speaker's Gallery of the Illinois House of Representatives in Springfield, thanks to a new partnership with Capital News Illinois. CNI's Jerry Nowicki, the editor-in-chief of the CNI operation, joins us now. And Jerry, you have some fresh reporting overnight that there are some obstacles for the governor's getting his budget passed in the form that he originally presented it back in February.
Right. So the good news is that the Governor's Office of Management and Budget now upped its revenue estimate by about $295 million, but that was accompanied by now Deputy Governor Andy Manar, formerly a state senator, sending a letter to the agency directors that said basically there's significant enough opposition to some of the governor's revenue proposals that he made in February, in that maybe lawmakers aren't supporting them, which could lead to agencies having to cut about $800 million.
What are those revenue enhancements that the governor was counting on to try to balance this budget in the way he originally intended?
Yeah, so it's interesting because especially the biggest one doesn't appear to be that controversial on its face. It's just extending a current law that caps the amount that corporations can claim in corporate net operating losses, and it actually allows them to claim a little more than current law, but because it was set to expire at the end of this year, that can't be counted as revenue for the next year. So if they extend it, it nets $526 million. And then there's just a couple other ones like increasing the tax rate that sports books pay on the revenues they make in sports gambling, and then just a couple other proposals like a cap on the retailers, a type of tax break that they can claim.
The one regarding sportsbook betting, though, that's a bit more controversial from what I'm hearing, because we're talking about going from a 15% tax up to 35%. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Yeah, that's the proposal. There's going to be pushback certainly from the sports books. They have a powerful lobby, it's organized, it's a bit underground, they're not doing news conferences and saying whatever, but their claim is that, oh, we might not be able to give you the best odds now, we might not be able to give you bonus bets or whatever, but the governor keeps pointing out that it's a tax on the sports books themselves and the revenue that they get, and not on the people who are using those books.
Going back to Deputy Governor Menard's letter to agency chiefs, he's telling them basically, from my reading of the letter, that he's asking them to consider cutting grants and other discretionary funds. Why is it important to lawmakers when it comes down to those grants?
Right, so I think it comes down to that lawmakers, that's the programming lawmakers really like to publicize. There's every day, every week, there's news conferences of people going to their parks and saying, look what we were able to do with this grant funding from the state. Look what I brought to our district. And it's just very popular programs that constituents like, that lawmakers like to tout. So, I think I pointed out in an article that I wrote that it's just as much a letter to the General Assembly saying, hey, look, this is the picture, as it is to the agency directors.
Now, lawmakers are hoping to get out of here before the Memorial Day weekend. They've set May 24th as adjournment day. They actually have until May 31st before you need a supermajority to pass anything. What, in your view, is likely to happen in the next couple of weeks? Are they going to meet that first deadline?
I'm starting to think that they are just putting the deadlines earlier so that when they extend past it, it's not an emergency. It's just people are inconvenienced and they have to stay a couple days longer. So if you look at the calendars, it says budget hold date on all of the days after the 24th through the end of May. So I'm not predicting that it extends, but certainly it wouldn't surprise me if they go a little bit beyond the deadline.
And it only matters once you go past May 31st, because that's when you need supermajorities to actually pass anything with an effective date. Jerry Nowicki, Editor-in-Chief for Capital News Illinois, thank you very much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers.
Thank you, Jack.
We continue our discussions on Illinois Lawmakers with State Senator L.G. Sims Jr. of Chicago, a Chicago Democrat. He is also the leading budgeteer for the Senate Democrats, and we're a couple of weeks away from the scheduled end of the session. Where do things stand with trying to get this budget hammered out by May 24th?
Well, I think we're on a good path, having discussions about what revenues look like, what the expenditures look like. I think we're on path to adjourn by the 24th, and that's a great place to be.
The governor's budget as submitted was around $52.7 billion back in February. There's more money in there for K through 12 schools, social services, early childhood, higher education. What are the Democratic priorities for this new budget?
Well, it's same priorities they've always been. Protecting our most vulnerable, educating our children, growing our economy, keeping our communities safe. Those are things that making sure we have good jobs in our communities. Those are our priorities, and they're what when we pass a budget, there'll be a reflection of those priorities, but also the priorities that we think will continue Illinois on the sound fiscal footing and on the right path.
There was a memo that came out over last few hours in Springfield from the Deputy Governor, Andy Menard, and it has to do with some revenue enhancements that Governor Pritzker wanted in this budget to be able to do some of the things that he wants to accomplish in fiscal year 25. The letter in effect says if he doesn't get those revenue enhancements, some of the sportsbook betting increases, things like that, the agency leaders may be looking at an $800 million set of cuts.
Well, I think it's good planning. You know, we know that if you always have to have contingencies A, B, and C. So the governor's proposal was one, making sure that if those revenues as proposed by the governor don't exist, then we have to have another plan. And I think that's really just the other plan. But then it also has to have the reflection of the caucus's priorities, and we'll have to have those discussions too. So I just saw the memo as part of that process, part of the planning process, to make sure as we get ready for the final passage, where we have all the options before us.
Does that give any cause for alarm, though, with it being this close to the scheduled end of the session?
No, none at all. Because you know, as you and I know, Bruce, Jack, there's a long way to go in legislative time. 15 days is a lifetime, so we really got a lot of time. I think you'll see both the staffs and members working around the clock from here through the end of the session. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
As we look at some other things that have come up in the last few days here, the mayor was here yesterday. The mayor of Chicago was here. He's asking for more money for Chicago schools. I believe that was about $1 billion in new spending. How was the reception given to the mayor this week?
I thought it was good. I met with the mayor. I had some conversations with him. But I think when you look at his request in the context of all requests, everybody has, we have requests from local governments across the state, making sure that they have what they need to be successful. And that's as we pass a budget that reflects those priorities, we want our economy to thrive. We didn't get to $1 trillion in GDP by accident. It took careful planning, and it took sound fiscal stewardship, and that's where we want to continue that.
And it's not as though the revenues are cratering. You just got good reports from the Commission on Governmental Forecasting and Accountability and the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. There is growth, but not as much as we'd seen in recent years.
Well, that's right. You know, and I always say that each year, each budget has its own identity, and the fiscal year 25 budget is no different. It's different than the fiscal 24 budget. It's different than fiscal 23. But you're right. Revenues are not cratering. Our growth is slowing, but we knew that was going to happen. That's why we took those multi-year conservative approaches to budgeting, and we're seeing that pay off. That's why you see our bill backlog at its lowest level it's been in decades. You see our credit rating being upgraded 9 times. That's why you just saw Moody's take our fiscal outlook from stable to positive. You're seeing all those things happen because we are taking the decision and making decisions that are going to have long-term benefit.
Well, we are going to be watching this very carefully over the next 14 days or so here. One last question, about 20 seconds. Any money for the new Bears Stadium?
I have not seen that, but you know, again, we want to make sure that we pass a budget that reflects our priorities, that we invest in our communities, and we're going to do that.
Senator L.G. Sims Jr., thank you for your time on Illinois Lawmakers.
My pleasure.
Our next guest on Illinois Lawmakers is Deputy House Republican Leader Noreen Hammond of Macomb. Leader, good to have you back on Illinois Lawmakers.
Great to see you, Jack. Thank you.
You're one of the lead budgeteers for the House Republicans, and we've been watching the budget was originally set for about $52.7 billion by Governor Pritzker a few months ago. How is that budget proposal working out now? What are you seeing as far as the Republicans are going?
So, of course, within our caucus, we have frequent discussions on the budget and the priorities, and also what the shared priorities are between House Republicans, House Democrats, and our colleagues in the other chamber as well. So those discussions, unfortunately, are just within our caucus. We haven't been privy to any budget conversations with any of the other budgeteers or been invited to any of those meetings if they're happening.
And I was just talking to Senator Sue Rezin. She said that in her Senate caucus, they're just now starting to hear the negotiations getting underway. And there's a new wrinkle on this. There's fresh reporting from Capital News, Illinois, that Deputy Governor Andy Manar has sent out a memo to state agency heads that if about $1 billion in new revenues aren't found for this new budget, there will be somewhere in the order of $800 million in cuts that agencies might have to experience in the fiscal 25 fiscal year.
And it's not a surprise, Jack, that memo has gone out because the governor's introduced budget included about $1 billion in revenue that would require some statutory changes. There are increases, tax increases on businesses. Also a proposed shift from the road fund of $175 million to supplant RTA and Metra and those services up in the urban area. So without those statutory changes, and it's my understanding that there is quite a bit of pushback from all members, not all members, but all parties, against those enhancements and statutory changes.
It's interesting because the Democrats have super majorities in both houses, and it doesn't look at this point like they're all on the same page.
No, absolutely not. I think there are lots of push for what their particular interests are versus what someone else's particular interests are. And as we know, that becomes a Christmas tree, and the revenue needs just become greater and greater.
That's the old saying around here. The Christmas tree gets more and more ornaments on it, and it falls over under its own weight. As you look at the proposals that are out there, are any of these non-starters, or do they have any promise of Republican votes at this point?
Well, certainly the increased taxes on businesses for Republicans are always non-starters. And for my district, and certainly those of us that represent central and downstate communities, the switch from the road fund, the transfer of $175 million out of the road fund that several years ago we put in a lockbox, if you will, so that we didn't use it for things that were not related to road. Now they will argue that Metra and RTA are certainly, and PACE are certainly road issues, but not for many of us in central and downstate.
And there's that proposal out there to actually create a new agency that combines Chicago Transit Authority, Metra, and PACE, which deals with folks with disabilities. Is that being greeted with any enthusiasm here?
Really and truly, that has been a discussion non-starter for us because of the transfer out of the road fund.
And of course, the mayor of Chicago was here this week asking for another $1 billion for Chicago public schools.
Yes, yes. And obviously didn't find the time to meet with our leader, Leader McCombie, but did find the time to meet with the other three leaders. So I think that speaks volumes right there.
As we count down to May 24th, that's kind of an arbitrary deadline. Do you think we're going to go past that into the past Memorial Day?
Well, you know, I never say never. There are a lot of folks that are very focused on May 24th for one reason or another. We do have on our calendar supplemental days for budget discussions if needed, and we will see how the discussions go within the next couple of weeks and who all is invited to that table.
Deputy House Republican Leader Noreen Hammond of Macomb, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Good to be with you.
Joining us now on Illinois Lawmakers, Assistant House Majority Leader Jay Hoffman of Swansea. Good to have you back on the program.
Good to have you back in the gallery.
It's great to be here. Great to be here. As we're talking, everyone, of course, is wondering about where are things with the budget. You're supposed to wrap up on May 24th. You've got until May 31st to do that. But there was, looks like an exercise in member management overnight. The Deputy Governor Andy Menard sent out a note to state agency heads that if some of those revenue enhancements that the governor asked for earlier in the spring don't pass, don't come to fruition, they may be looking at as many as $800 million in agency cuts this year.
Well, this is all part of the process. As you know, the governor goes first. He does a budget address, and then the General Assembly, the House and the Senate, they have their appropriations hearings, and we're going through that process now, where you really go line by line to figure out how we can have a balanced budget. I can just say this, we have balanced the budget every year under the Pritzker administration, I believe nine credit upgrades. So the proof is in the pudding, and the credit rating agencies certainly have liked what we have done. So we have to continue to work to get that balanced budget. Now, I don't know that I agree with the deputy governor on having to have all these revenue enhancements in order to have a balanced budget. But if we have to make some reductions, we'll make them.
And you had relatively good news from the Commission on Governmental Forecasting and Accountability, as well as the governor's own revised revenue estimates. The state is not deeply in trouble when it comes to next year.
No, and the one thing that we have to, I think we're smart about, is when we got all the federal money during the COVID era, we didn't really use that for operations. We used it for one-time things. So when we lost the federal money, other governments, state governments as well as cities and counties used it for operations, and that's caused a problem when the federal money went away. We didn't do that, and so we're not facing the same type of pressures as others.
You made some headlines last week as Illinois Democrats moved an election reform bill through in less than a week, quickly signed by Governor Pritzker. The legislation would bar major party candidates from entering a race if their party didn't field a candidate in the primary election cycle. What was the rationale behind that?
Well, first of all, there's a process, and for many years, since 1988, believe it or not, I've went through that process where you get the petitions, you get on the primary ballot, and then you're your party's nominee. What we've seen is a rash of increases in the number of people who just get appointed and don't go through that primary process to become the nominee. In fact, in 2022, there were 40 Democrats and Republicans, both sides of the aisle, who were put on by the process of just having the backroom party bosses putting people on the ballot and not facing the voters in the primary. 2 years before that, in 2020, there were only 11. And 2 years before that, in 2018, there were only 5. So we've seen people skirting the primary process, and we think that, and the reason we passed the bill is we think that we should get rid of the backroom deals. People should face the voters. They should talk about what they believe in, and then become their party's nominee.
Your Republican colleagues basically voted present as a group. They criticized the speed with which this went through both the House and the Senate, and that it might be helping out a Democratic incumbent in the Metro East area.
Well, it isn't about one person, and I can tell you from talking to some of my Republican colleagues who I love to serve with, some of them were very happy about the bill as well.
I want to ask
even though they voted present.
I want to ask one more question for you. There's a new project that you're working on to move the Metrolink all the way out to Scott Air Force Base from St. Louis?
Yeah, so our transit system is light rail transit system. It starts in Lambert Field in St. Louis, comes through East St. Louis into Belleville and onto the eastern edge of Belleville. Well, we, as part of the 2019 Capital Bill, we funded the extension of that all the way to Scott Air Force Base and the Mid-America Airport. So we're going to have the two major airports in the St. Louis area are going to be connected by a light rail system. That's ongoing jobs, economic development, and we're seeing a huge Boeing facility being built there, manufacturing facility, which is going to create over 300 jobs where they're going to actually build drones for the Navy.
We'll wait to see how all that works out. So thank you very much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers, Representative Hoffman. We appreciate it.
Good to see you and welcome back.
Up next on Illinois Lawmakers, Deputy Senate Republican leader Sue Rezin of Morris. Welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're here a couple of weeks ahead of the scheduled adjournment. I believe it's May 24th. You actually have till May 31st to actually pass a budget and the like. What are you hearing in the Senate Republican caucus about where these budget discussions are maybe just even getting underway now?
Well, the budget discussion is just getting underway. We have finally just been asked to participate in the meetings, and we only have a couple weeks left to put a budget together. But we have been very clear that the Illinois Senate Republicans are prioritizing the citizens of the state of Illinois, as opposed to the governor, who has proposed in his State of the Budget address that he would increase taxes and fees over $1 billion to help fund some of the programs that are his priority in his agenda, such as non-citizens.
The fate of that extra $1 billion in spending that the governor wants is in question at the moment because Deputy Governor Andy Menard has sent a letter to state agency officials that if some of those revenue enhancements like the sports book betting increase don't happen, they may be looking at $800 million in cuts to agency grants and discretionary spending.
Mm-hmm. And that's a concern to us. So the governor has increased spending, government spending, since he's been in office by 30%. By increasing fees and taxes in order to balance your budget is not something that we support, and we've been very vocal about we need to live within our means to make sure that we don't have to go back to the departments to cut their funding. Many of these departments are providing safety net services at a very difficult time for many citizens in the state of Illinois.
At the same time that we're talking about these budgetary pressures, there are others. The mayor of Chicago was here. He's asking for another $1 billion in funding for mainly the Chicago public schools. How was his trip received here?
Well, you know, I can tell you the reason that he's asking for another $1 billion for his schools is because the CPS Chicago public schools are in Tier 2, which means they have more property wealth. They can afford to put more money into their school system. Currently, there are 400 schools that are Tier 1 schools. They are the poorest of the poor in terms of property income who rely on state funding. They should be receiving more money for their school districts ahead of the Chicago public school system.
As we look to other issues that you're working on this session, the Safe Screens, Healthy Minds initiative has about 3 different parts to it. What is the basis of the program?
So Safe Screens, Healthy Minds is a program that I've been working on for the past year. As a parent, I'm very concerned about the negative impact that social media has on our minors. And I'm concerned about how the algorithms are written to addict the minors to the social media platform in order to collect data. Data is the most important thing that the social media giants collect money off of by selling advertising, by selling their data to other people. So the longer that these companies can keep the minors on their platform, the more data they collect. Now what happens? We've seen a huge increase in mental health problems, anxiety. We've seen increase in anxiety. We've seen an increase in minors taking their lives. because of their inability to handle the content that they're seeing but hadn't requested.
A key component of this is actually making sure that when they design these programs that they're age appropriate from the very beginning, correct?
And that's several bills that I have that make sure that the people on these platforms are age verified, right? There's oftentimes you have adults that are looking on these platforms and grooming minors, but they're posing as minors. So we need age verification, we need data protection, protect our data, and we need the ability to be in control of our data.
Senator, thanks very much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. We certainly appreciate that. Deputy Senate Republican Leader Sue Rezin of Morris.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Back on Illinois Lawmakers with Editor-in-Chief at Capital News Illinois, Jerry Nowicki. Jerry, as we look ahead to next week, we know that there's still some question about how the fiscal year 2025 budget may work out. What are some of the other issues that are still hanging fire here and still need to happen before lawmakers can go home?
Yeah, I think one of the ones that we're all watching is one that the governor sort of telegraphed in his February State of the State address, is that he'd really like to pass these reforms to the state's insurance agencies, sort of limiting the practices that they use to limit health care that their recipients can receive. So I was surprised a little bit a few weeks back when it had a pretty healthy bipartisan majority in the House. So I imagine it could go somewhere in the Senate. We just haven't seen it yet. There's still plenty of time as far as this goes, but that's a big one. And then the governor's also looking to create a standalone early childhood education agency to take some things away from DCFS and maybe 3 or 4 other agencies and just combine them into one that really focuses on early childhood. So I think he included some money in his budget, but we're still waiting to see whether the enacting legislation passes.
I think that was around $13 million, if I remember correctly. But again, as you say, they're actually borrowing parts of existing state agencies to pull that off.
Exactly.
That is it for Illinois Lawmakers for this edition. Thanks to Jerry Nowicki, Editor-in-Chief of Capital News Illinois. We will be back next week with another edition of Illinois Lawmakers.